Very pertinent issues raised by the president and supported by several of the Jubilee leaders there. That's the topic of discussion this morning. And I'm joined in studio by Professor Eric Komolo, who is an advocate of the High Court, and he's also an aspirant to Rangwe constituency. And Gabriel Muthuma, I say, you know, we should give you a permanent seat here.
You should. I demand that.
You demand a permanent seat right here. Thank you very much for coming.
From August, you give me a permanent seat.
Sit here. Oh, from August, you also want to come here permanently.
After I win my election.
Oh, thank you. Let's start from there, Komolo. Yes. The change of the date, is it acceptable? You have done a lot of groundwork, for example, in Rangwe, and then suddenly you hear this rhetoric about a possibility that a date must change. From an advocate's perspective, is this cast in stone owing to the fact that it's in the Constitution, or there is even a possibility that the election date can change?
Well, it's possible to change the election date. Let's start from there.
Under what circumstances?
Specific circumstances. Okay. One of the candidates passes on.
Okay.
Where we've reached, so this is the only scenario where the elections might be changed. But certainly not because of a tender.
Okay.
Particularly because if you look at the judgment that came out, I think, on Friday, it's very clear that a substantial chunk of the tender process is continuing. So the issue here is presidential election ballot papers. And everyone who's looked at this thing, the disputes for over, I think, 4 or 5 months now, and should be able to appreciate that the right way is for the parties to negotiate. And
that's what they're doing this afternoon.
I commend IEBC for that. That's what they ought to have done, because this is a question of confidence building.
But you're commending them for that, and you're forgetting they're also saying they're appealing this week. So which is which? Appeals,
if I looked at their statement, was it on Saturday? It seems to be that they were coming down to realize that, you know, they have to negotiate. And remember, they are meeting all the presidential candidates or their representatives today. It will be, of course, in bad taste for them to meet them this morning and then file an appeal tomorrow.
Okay.
It's in everyone's interest and in public interest, for this matter, to be settled through some level of negotiations.
Okay.
Partly because the cost of election is very expensive. You don't want to put the country in this cycle of campaigns and hatred and intimidation for another 6 months, just because of presidential ballot papers that ought to be negotiated. And so IEBC owes us a duty to be a little bit more transparent with the tendering process, to consult satisfactorily, and if it means they award it to another party that is probably neutral to all the presidential candidates, the better for the country. As parliamentary aspirant, I mean candidate, and of course for other positions, it's clear that the ballot papers are being printed now, so we do not seem to have a major dispute there.
Okay. Yes. All right, I'll come back to you, because your ballot papers are less important as compared to
the presidential.
No, they're less important because there's no negotiations about them. But Gabriel, tell me, what do you think? I mean, the IEBC, this is back and forth over the ballot papers, you know?
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't go much into the judgment, but probably what I read, why IEBC will be going back to court, to me, it's more like they are seeking an interpretation. Going by what the chairman, Chebukati, said, he said, you know, we do not have what you call a policy framework or the legislation of what you would tell us, you know, what it means to understand the narrative of public participation. It is not covered. They don't even have guidelines on the Public Procurement Act. They don't know where they are going to, you know, to get this narrative from the court or from the procurement authority. So I feel sorry for IEBC at this point, mainly because probably this is an exercise that they should have conducted earlier, and probably they failed to do that, but not because of their own doing. It's because it's not covered. And I think where he finds himself to be is that I don't know the kind of legal advantage that he has at IEBC, but there seems to be a loophole that continues to provide or present itself, that whatever they do, somebody runs to court. And for the prayers to be heard now, you have the court saying that you must go through what you call public participation. Yes. He did not understand what it was. And that's why probably they are heading back to court. He said it himself. He said he did not have legislation over it, not a policy framework. So I think the court may go out there and tell, you know, I mean, Justice Maraga was also on record saying that in public participation, we don't expect you to talk to the entire nation. We don't expect you to involve, you know, everyone. So really, it's actually a very murky situation. And by the way, I've been just asking myself, coming today, what if somebody will go, like our good Mheshimiwa, will go and say, I was not even involved in the exercise that you people are talking about. Could it hold a stay? Probably it could. So it's a murky situation.
That was the point, one of the points, the winning points for Third Way Alliance.
Exactly.
They were never consulted.
Exactly.
I'll take you through the press release again last week on Saturday. On Saturday. The first thing, hold a meeting with all presidential candidates today at 11:30 going onwards. Now it's 2 p.m. Invite the public to submit memoranda on the procurement of presidential ballot papers on 11th. That is tomorrow. Public hearing on 12th. That's on Wednesday. Then the third one is appeal the High Court decision on public participation in the procurement process.
And you know, that is actually more funnier. The reason I'm saying this, I mean, look at it this way. We are talking about public participation, which again is not captured in the Procurement Act. Are you telling me that IEBC must take to heart?
It doesn't have to be captured.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be captured in the constitution. I mean, in the public procurement.
Yes.
It doesn't have to.
Yes.
But the constitution is expressed on matters that touch on public. The whole things that touch on.
I think the public participation, more than anything, is just about goodwill. And that's what I read. Because at the end of the day, IEBC are controlled by the law. There is the issue of open procurement. Direct procurement. It's in their constitution. So they can choose both. Even after public participation, they can still choose.
Nothing stops these people, Komolo, from awarding the same tender to Al-Ghurair. Nothing stops them, absolutely.
Nothing stops them, and I slightly disagree with my brother here when you come to defining what public participation is.
Yes.
It's very clear when it comes to elections in Rangwe, it's very clear who the candidates are, who their representatives are. When it comes to presidential elections, it's very clear who the candidates are, and therefore who the stakeholders are, who need to be consulted, because I cannot then participate in an election in Rangwe if I'm not very sure that the processes and the staff involved are neutral. So really the question, as I said earlier, is basically a question of confidence building. It's basically a question, of course we do understand the dynamics of it's called Al-Ghurair, the dynamics and concerns that probably there's a bit of conflict of interest here and there.
Which the court ruled out.
No, but it's very crucial when you look at the broader question of public interest involved in the presidential election. So if there's perception of biasness or potential biasness on the part of Al-Ghurair, then a logical public participation will conclude that they are not neutral enough to print the ballot papers. So let's wait and see what will be the outcome of consultations today. But it's important to note that whatever they discuss, IEBC must be careful not to then appeal on abstract points like public participation, because what any form of appeal will do is to delay the process, to take it back to court. Yet, as I said elsewhere, you cannot successfully solve political questions using judicial means.
Okay, you need to sit and negotiate about all these things.
You need to sit, you need to talk. You know, you have just seen the president trying to suggest that the judiciary could be having some, conflict of interest here, siding with one party or the other. Granted, that could be the case. But if you look at it broadly, a person of the stature of the president should not then be able to intimidate an institution, or appear to intimidate an institution.
I'll talk about that, because there are people, there's a completely different set of people who think that is not intimidation, it's concern. But now, the fact that it's coming from the president, it looks as though it's giving directives to an independent agency of the government.
That's right.
We'll talk about that. But on public participation, because I'd like to exhaust this on public participation, what is the level of participation? For example, can we break this down, for example, to the constituency level? For example, during the party primaries, for example, there was concerned that even in the selection of returning officers who were supposed to do them, the other candidates were not consulted. Remember the accusation that Anyang' Nyong'o left with some when he went somewhere, and then you see, went to Nyaka. You have been on the ground. He's not a politician per se, but tell us, what is the level, for example, and if the things that you want to do, how do you then say that there was adequate participation? For example, break it down to the ground so that we understand the level of participation.
Before I do that, I think we need to differentiate between expectations when it comes to involvement or participation in political party primaries and institutions of the state that are well-resourced like IEBC.
Okay.
In terms of an institution like IEBC, you expect a level of engagement from day one. You expect them to outline their processes and involve stakeholders from day one.
And they have been doing it.
To some extent, they have been doing it.
Yes.
To some extent, I'm not, at least in theory, they have been doing it.
In theory, we see this all the time.
In substance, you need to be seen to be neutral while doing it.
Okay.
You need to be seen to be trying as much as possible to go for a neutral party. Because this thing, at the end of the day, also involves a lot of public money. I think it's about 2.5 billion or something like that.
Yeah, the contract, the project
and if you nullify this contract, then there's a possibility that Al Ghurair will go to the international arbitration, which will expose us to a lot of expenses.
Yes, and they will win.
And of course, the Al Ghurair will likely win.
They've been given, is it called credit note? What is it?
Yes, credit note, I think.
In fact, we've already paid half.
So the biggest question here is whether IEBC has a right to then expose the public to that kind of bill. And this can be avoided when they engage the parties in a very, very transparent way. Remember, Al Ghurair is not just any other entity. They have a history of involvement with IEBC and certainly with elections.
And they've done all the by-elections.
Yes. So they could be having the capacity, but do they exhibit the neutrality? I think that is what you
the concern there.
Yes, that's the concern, and that's what you need to engage with.
Gabriel, this neutrality that Prof is talking about here is basically because there's an allegation that the president is a friend of Al-Saif. Al-Said, the owner of Al Ghurair, Al Ghurair Group. That is the only reason.
No, number one, that's speculation of the highest order.
But it's not speculation.
Just because somebody visits the State House does not mean he's a friend of the president.
No. Gabriel, if tomorrow... No, wait.
Okay.
If you come to my house last night...
Right.
Yes, and we had dinner last night.
Yes.
And today I'm hosting you in the show.
Yes.
People will obviously say that these guys have a personal relationship.
Now you see...
I say inviting him for dinner together with other friends.
It's interpretation. We have seen so many president and world leaders and business leaders come to the State House. They've been actually, a red carpet has been extended to them. But that does not necessarily mean, you see, where the problem is, this is the president and also the party leader. And by virtue of that, you would interpret these guys are friends. But you see, it was not only the president alone. His family was actually brought into this whole matter.
Yes, I remember that.
Coming back to the issue of public participation, because I'm liking the fact that you want actually to exhaust it, and I would also want to learn, and where IEBC is coming from, that's why I'm understanding them. They say, for us to avoid somebody running back to court, please help us understand what you mean
by public participation,
so that we do not have somebody again run into court and say we did
not involved.
Exactly. Okay. So to them, probably they could understand. And you remember Justice Maraga actually preempted this, saying you do not have to involve the whole country. You do not have blah, blah, blah. I think he said some rules, but IEBC still doesn't understand, because they say, according to what we have legally, is that we are an independent body. The fact that, yes, there are people running to court, we must heed to the court summons, and we must heed also to the court decisions.
Okay.
But that said and done, we still have a law and legislation and policy to follow. What among these have we done wrong? Public participation was not one of them. And that's why I agree with Prof when he says there is an element probably of bringing up credibility. Could be it. But if public participation suffices, is that the last we see? I put it to you, that would not be what we see. Because even if you look at the statements in Mombasa, and I was just talking to somebody there and saying, if the Chief Justice would have known, I mean, like they say, hindsight is 20/20. If I would have known, these utterances would have brought these issues, I wouldn't have uttered them. Because what people are arguing is, and probably that's what the president is saying, he's not actually attacking the CJ.
We played the bite yesterday.
Yeah, listen to him very well.
The sound bite from the CJ.
He is saying he does not want his court, the Chief Justice now, he's expressing it to him, please don't allow your courts to be used by people who want to stagnate and ensure that the elections are not held on August 8th.
As I ask my director to find the bite of the CJ speaking, and we'll listen to what he says, I'd like to go to Komolo, and my question is, the first time this tender was nullified was at the High Court.
Yes.
The second time, and the High Court was basically, there was no system in place, the commissioners were not there. Then we go to the process, and that's at PPOA, where it was again nullified. And the third time now is at the High Court again. Never, during these two occasions, did we ever tout issue of public participation. Where did it
well,
come
I think
from?
it was no. I think it was a hidden aspect of the.
I think they're digging.
Yes.
I think they're fishing for reasons.
Not at all. Not at all. If you look at it from the perspective, the original one that the commissioners were not in and all that, that simply means that the process could not have been as inclusive as possible. If you look at the second stage about public,
but it was expressed, Wakili. It was expressed in that for you to make such a decision with such a magnitude, the secretariat led by Chiloba cannot sit and make that decision.
That's right.
It was expressed.
That's
but
right.
in spite of that, they decided to go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, that then goes back to the interest IEBC has in particularly awarding this Al Ghurair
And it was
entity.
canvassed in court.
And you know, the way they insist on it obviously then raises speculation that there could be something fishy about it. Their point, of course, is that the time is short. We need to have this going. The elections are just a couple of days away. But that does not satisfy. Okay, this country has a history. As a history of manipulation, a history of corruption and all this. So that does not satisfy all the involved parties. And I'm telling you as a candidate, this thing is resource intensive. The last thing you want is for somebody sitting somewhere in a secretariat to try to manipulate the process from day one, or appear to manipulate, because I'm not suggesting they're manipulating. But if they don't, and they insist on this Al Ghurair thing, and they know how presidential elections in particular have brought turmoil in this country, then surely
just careful.
Surely.
The more, I agree with what somebody said, the more things change, the more they remain the same. I heard over the weekend, and it's not only over the weekend, I think a presidential candidate who's actually in this election, I heard him say that this election should be done by the United Nations. You remember that?
Should start by printing the ballot. United Nations.
Exactly. If we were to go that way, and probably that's why I say a lot of information but very little knowledge, they didn't know that Al Ghurair is a preferred vendor of the United Nations and the World Bank. But you see, the other thing that nobody is bringing in, and I'm yet to hear this, is Al Ghurair has failed in one way or the other, whether it's capacity or whether it's credibility. Nobody has brought that out clearly. And to me, that is why across the divide, including the communication that we had from the High Court, it did not hold water. So, is it perception that is being driven there? Because I think as president and as a party leader, what he said, probably many people have accused him, you know what, you are acting as if you are not a stakeholder in this process. All right? After the ruling, many people were out in town clapping and said, NASA has won. And I think virtue of that, the president spoke. Now, those are two things that many people don't want to take into heart. That if the president was to sit down probably with his legal, not only legal advisors, but his key campaign strategists, they would actually tell him, Mr. President, don't make a lot of noise on this, because in this ruling, and Wakili, you'll agree with me, you have won. Because if I look at the judgment, he was vindicated that he had nothing to do with Al Ghurair.
Actually, that is number one. I was in court. That was not the case.
No,
he wasn't vindicated.
In sense that the prayers that were brought by NASA,
vindicated.
The prayers that were brought by NASA, were they not thrown out with the same contempt that they came out?
What the judge said, Gabriel, is that they did not provide sufficient.
Exactly.
Yes. So it doesn't mean that there's no relationship. It's just that you used newspaper cuttings to prove your case. So we cannot rely on
my good friend.
So if
my good friend. What else? What else were we expecting? When you don't have evidence, what is it? You are led free. That's sufficient evidence. The other thing is that they had under dealings, and this procurement was flawed.
Yes.
Again, that was thrown out. So, question is, whose win here? Just because it's a technicality?
Look, Ken, we've been in this country for some time. When you see President Uhuru react in a particular way, particularly the way he reacted yesterday, the word vindication does not seem to fit into that description. Here's the point. You know, there's no problem the president meeting business leaders or for that matter heads of states. This is entirely diplomatic. So I personally have no problem that he met those people.
And he was a head of delegation of the Dubai Chambers of Commerce.
Yes, I have absolutely no problem with that. But these people are not mad to just suggest that, you know, there's something below the carpet here. These people must be having some level of...
But they couldn't prove it in court.
I mean, it's very difficult to prove such kind of things because elections is basically a question of confidence. Once there's perception that this gentleman could be having some relationship, and then this guy has the monopoly of printing ballot papers that are going to be used in the presidential, where the president is a party, think twice.
Yes.
Dealing with the UN,
on the value,
yes, on the first value, think twice. Remember, Al Ghurair does not have monopoly of capacity to print ballot papers throughout the world. And dealing with the UN of itself cannot be a reason to legitimize Al Ghurair's capacity. Remember, the UN has a history of interacting with institutions that are not necessarily as transparent as people will want us to believe. So here is the point, the bottom line. Forget about the president, forget about Raila, forget about all these other parties. The bottom line is that we have an election in the next 29 or so days, and we need to be confident that we are going into this election in a very transparent and honest way.
Okay.
And if there's one party that probably is trying to confuse this, and the best thing is to engage the way they're engaged today and go for a neutral party or set parameters for Al Ghurair.
And let them deal with it.
Yes, just set parameters.
Hopefully.